Hey, John Morris here, and in this lesson we're going to cover how to create a content management system. So, to give you an overview of what's going on, I'm not going to, this lesson is going to be a little bit more conceptual. At this point, we've gone over a ton of code. You've learned, how to add things to database, how to work with databases, you've learned login systems and things like that. So now we're getting to what's really the fun part of PHP, where you don't have to think so much in the code. You can actually start to think conceptually in big picture and put pieces together. And that's exactly what we're going to do here. So I'm going to give you the kind of the underlying concept of how a content management system works. And my hope is that when you see that, then you'll start to understand how you could put other types of systems together with your own applications, your own concepts. Now to do this, we're going to copy or not copy, but we're going to use kind of the same conceptual way of doing this from one of the most popular content management systems out there, and that is WordPress. So, and also the other thing with this is I haven't pre-written anything for this. I know a lot of videos I do, I pre-write just to cut down on me having to write a bunch of code, and you have to watch me write a bunch of code. But in this one, I haven't written a single thing. In fact, you'll see we're on our localhost / cman folder here, and that particular folder is empty here. Again, I haven't written a single line of code for this, so we're going to do this from scratch. So again, we're going to dive in, look at it conceptually, and go from there. So as you can see, we're on our cman little folder here, and we don't have anything in it. So what we're going to do is we're first going to create our index.php page. Now, in a content management system like this, as you'll see, but everything hinges around the index.php page. So for example, in WordPress, when you go to a page, the page you're going to is the index.php page, and that page is running logic that makes everything else work. And then they use some URL rewriting in order to make it look like you're not actually on the index.php page, but you really are. So we'll cover how that works here. So let's come over here to our editor. Again, you can see here I have nothing here. So essentially we're just going to write this as index.php. I'm going to save this as our index.php page, and let's go in here, and we're in our cman folder, and we'll just call this index.php. Okay. All right, so now we have an index.php page. If we refresh this, then we're going to get what we just wrote. So what happens on this index.php page, or actually what happens overall with a content management system, is, as I said, you're going to this index.php page. And again, we've covered this, but when you go to the folder, you're actually going to index.php like this. It's the same thing. So when you go to this page, what's happening is that with a content management system, we're going to pass query parameters. So the way this would look is we'd actually, if we're looking for, each post is going to be inserted into our database when we create it and it's going to have a unique index number or ID number. So we're actually going to pass the ID number. So if we want the first post, we can use whatever query variable we want, but for example, WordPress uses P. We'll say P equals 1. So what we're actually doing is we're going to index.php and we're passing a query parameter for which post we want. Now, of course, if we want the home page, we're not going to pass anything, and all of our logic on our index.php page is going to handle whether there's no query parameter, whether that query parameter is like P like this, or again in WordPress you'll have page ID like this for pages. You'll have, I believe it's cat ID, or actually it's just cat like this for category pages. In the index.php page has the logic to handle all of this. Now, I know you probably may go look at WordPress right away right now and look at their index.php page, and you're not going to see that logic. They actually do some redirecting and things like that, so you won't see the actual and includes and stuff like that. So you're not going to actually see this actual code that we're going to cover inside the index.php page of WordPress, but it is ultimately getting pulled from all of the rest of their code to do what we're going to do. Okay, so we have, again, a number of scenarios that we need to handle. So we're going to write logic in our index.php page that handles all these. So specifically for this tutorial, we are going to handle the home page, we handle a single post page, and we'll talk about category pages as well. Now, you could make essentially whatever you wanted. You could have tag pages that show a list of posts with a certain tag. You could come up with your own taxonomy. You could do however you wanted, really, depending on what your setup is. You can pass whatever query parameter you want to. So again, we're just going to cover the home page, a single post, and the categories, and that'll give you the concept of what's going on here. So let's go ahead and let's go to our index.php page and see what we're going to do. So the first thing that we're going to do, of course, we're going to make this PHP, and then we're going to check to see, the first thing we need to do is check to see what kind of page we're on. So we're going to we're going to do a get, and we'll do post equals, and we'll get the P like this. Okay. Now, there's a couple ways you can do this. You probably want to wrap this, because if you do this, let's do this, and we'll just do echo post for right now. So if you do it like this, what's going to happen is, if you don't, let's get rid of this, and we don't have a P here. A lot of times what you'll get is you'll get a warning. I'm not getting it now. I must have the debugging turned off, but a lot of times if you you set a variable that you don't have, like if you try to get P, but there's no P passed in the query parameter, it'll give you a notice or a warning that this variable doesn't exist. Okay, so a lot of times what you can do is you can do if, and then not empty is a good one for get, like this. So if get's not empty, then we're going to set it so that way you know that there's actually something stored in your get super global here. That's one way that you can do that. That's what I recommend that you do here. Get this back to a variable. So run that check, and then that'll eliminate those warnings and so on and so forth. So that's one thing that you can do. And then you'll see if we actually put in something here for P, we'll do P equals 1, then our echo is going to be 1. If we put 2, then it's going to be 2, and so on and so forth. So what we want to do on this index.php page is we want to see where we're at. So we're going to do, if not empty, get, then we're going to do post equals P. We can do cat, or cat equals, and then we'll do a get for the cat. Okay. So essentially what we're doing here is we're getting all of the possible query parameters that could get passed that are valid for our application. So in this case, again, I said we're going to handle the home page, which the home page will be if nothing is passed. Then we're going to handle a single post page. That's when we're going to pass a query parameter, our P query parameter, and then our category page, which would be our cat query parameter. Now, again, if you had tags, you could be passing a tag query parameter, whatever other different scenarios you might have different query parameters that get passed, so you could just check for those. In this case, this is all that we need to check for. So now what we're going to do is we can do an if statement that says if empty post, right? So if our post is empty and our cat is empty, then we're going to assume that this is the home page. So if our post is empty and our cat is empty, we're going to just echo home. All right, so let's check that, make sure that does what we want it to do here. So if both of these are empty, then we're just going to assume it's the home page. And so we're echoing home. Okay, so now we can kind of test that out. And then we can do, off of that, we can do else if not empty, and we can do P, or our post. Then we're going to assume, so if our post is not empty, then we're going to assume this is a single page. So we can echo single, right? and then we can do else. Now, you could do a simple else here off of this because you only have one other valid scenario. However, you may add scenarios later, so what we want to do is we want to set this up for that. So what we're going to do here is we're going to make this an else if as well, and we're going to say else if not empty, and we're going to do our cat. Okay, so if our category isn't empty, then we're going to assume this is a cat. Okay, we're going to do echo cat. All right, and I'm not going to add anything else onto this. You could add an else statement as a catch-all for the end and say throw an error maybe, but we want to error silently, so we're not going to do that. So essentially what's going to happen here is we're going to check to see if post and cat are empty. If they are empty, then we know it's home. We're just going to return home. If they're not empty, then we're going to check to see if post is empty. And if post isn't empty, then we're going to use it. If cat isn't empty, then we're going to then use it. So if we come back over to our page here, we have nothing here, so we should get home. And then if we pass a query parameter of p equals 1, we should get single, and we have something going on here. So let's go ahead and check out why that's not working here. Okay, and it's not working because I didn't save it. So if we save it, then we come back over here, you'll see it work. So p equals 1, so now that's working here. And if we do cat equals 1, then we should get where it says cat. Now if we pass something strange, like let's do q equals 3, right? Q's not something we looked for. It's just going to go back to the home page because in this case post and cat are still both empty. Even though a query parameter is getting passed, it's not post and it's not cat. So it's just going to send us back to the home page, which is really what we want it to do. So if something weird gets passed, we just go straight to the home page. So this scenario then essentially does all of really the main logic we need for a content management system. It checks to see if we're on the home page, we're on a single post page, or we're on a category page, and then it allows us to return content based on which particular page we happen to be on. Now, what we're going to do is based on which page we're on, we're going to do certain queries to our database in order to be able to pull the data that we need. So if we're on a home page, to pull a list of all of our posts. If we're on a single post page, to figure out what single post page we're on, and then be able to grab the data for that page. And then if we're on a category page, being able to grab all the posts that are in that category and be able to list those out and have links to the individual posts and so on and so forth. So what we're going to do now, a lot of that logic is actually going to be class-based. So it's going to involve building classes, again, for our interacting with our database, for running our queries, for having our backend where we can add posts and so on and so forth. So again, this is the major logic of making it work on the front end. Now we're going to start doing all the back end stuff to essentially support all of this. Now, in order to build all of this back end functionality, there's a number of ways you could do this. Again, it's going to be class based. So what I recommend you do is you build classes that you can add to your pages. You can call methods in your pages, so you're not writing all of the code in the index.php. So essentially what we want is we want to be able to include our files for our classes and then call maybe one or two functions inside each of these if statements, and that'll do all of the functionality for listing our home posts, or our posts for our home page, and the same thing for our single page, and the same thing for our category page. So we want to write our classes in such a way so that we can do that. So there's a number of ways that you can break this down. Almost always you're going to have some sort of database class. So a class that interacts directly with your database, so you're not having to constantly rewrite all of that code. And then a class for your queries, so being able to query the data from the database. And then probably a separate class for when you create your posts and you add them to the database, so for inserting stuff. So that's what we're going to do. We're actually going to create 3 different classes. So what I would do here is I'll come over here and I'll do an includes folder, and in this includes then is where we're going to put our 3 different classes. So we'll create a new one and we'll just call this database, and so we'll save that, and we'll save that in our includes folder as, I typically just save them as class, and then I'll call this db.php. Really, you can, the naming convention, you can do it however you'd like. So we'll save that, and we'll create a new one, and we'll call this query, and we'll save that as class query.php. And our last one here, we'll call this, I don't know, we can call it just insert. We'll just call it insert for now. You probably come up with a better name than that. So we'll just call this class insert. So we're just going to be inserting data with this. Okay. So this is going to allow us to then have all of our functionality for, again, interacting with the database, and then on top of that we'll have our query class and our insert class for inserting data. Again, you could probably come up with better names for those, however you want to do it. So the next thing that we want to do then, or what I like to do, is I like to build the backend admin interface. And I like to build the interface first, because once I build the interface, and again, this is before I even build the database, because the interface is going to ultimately determine what I need in the backend in the database and how I need to set it up in order to handle the interface for submitting data. So I like to build the interface on the back end first, of where I'm going to actually submit data. So again, from all the other tutorials, you know that that's really just a form. So we're going to be building a form on the back end. So I like to build that first. Now, we've talked, especially in the login lesson, about how to secure all of this. I'm not going to, beat a dead horse and go back over the login stuff. What I would say to you is that when we talk about the form that we're going to build to submit data to the database, if you remember back to the login system, you ultimately build the login system so that you have an area that a user must log into in order to be able to access it. Well, your form for submitting data or creating posts with your content management system would be inside of that protected area. Obviously, you don't want it publicly available. So again, there's nothing fancy. You can protect this page that we're going to build this form on just like you would any other page, whether it had PHP on it or not. So there's nothing special you have to do. You just, again, with what we did with the login system, you need to add the code to it to make sure that it's a protected page. So again, it's really that straightforward, and I'm not going to go back over all the login stuff. You can look at the login system for that. So we're just going to build the form in this particular tutorial, and it's just going to be publicly available. But again, you know that you need to put that inside of some secure area. And then if you want to do, again, get fancy like WordPress does and have different roles, so you can have different people, have authors, editors, and so on and so forth. You would build a system for managing that, and so on and so forth. So but again, we're going to just focus on the big broad strokes here. So looking at the interface, then we'll go ahead and we'll create a page, and this is going to be a PHP page, but there's going to be HTML on this page because it's going to be a form. So we'll start off and we'll just make this HTML page. Again, you'll want to do all the stuff in terms of your doc type and all that. Again, I'm not going to get into all that as that's stuff that we've covered, but this is going to be just a standard HTML page, and inside of that, we'll have our head section, and we'll have our body section. You could probably write macros for this stuff. I'm stubborn, I don't ever do that, but you could write macro. You can actually write macros inside of Notepad++. That'll actually create all this stuff for you. But anyway, I'm just going to put a title and call this insert post like this. And then our body here is where we're going to write our form. So again, we want to look at what are the standard things that we're going to want for a particular form. So I'm going to wrap these each in just paragraph tags like this. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do the title. So we're going to do input. It'll be a text input like this, and we'll give it a name of post title. Right? I like to typically match these to what's going to be in the database. So when I create things in the database, I'm fairly deliberate. I use underscores. So post title is going to be the name of the column in the database when I create it. So that's what I'm going to give the name of this particular input field. Of course, you're going to want to add classes and probably IDs to these so that you can style them. We're not going to worry about styling here because we'll end up with a 8-hour video if I try and do all of that stuff. So we have our title input. So that's our post title. And then we'll do another paragraph tag here, and we'll go with a text area, and this is going to be our post content. Okay, so we'll do our post content, and then we'll do text area like that. Okay, and then we'll have our categories, because we're going to need categories for this particular setup. So there's a number of ways you could do categories. You could do it, with WordPress, the way they do it is you can create a category, have that stored in the database, and you have a completely separate table for that category. And then you can pull those and display those. You could have it where it's just something they enter by hand. You could have a preset list. I think what we'll do here is we're going to do an input, and we're going to do a checkbox. And when you do that, though, you need to give them all the same name here. So input type equals checkbox, where name equals, and we'll do post category like this. Okay, and we're going to want to give this some sort of name. So we'll do value equals, and we'll say this is cat1. Okay, and we'll talk about all this here in just a second. And we're going to want to put a label. So we'll do label. We're actually going to do a label on all these. And we'll do for, and we'll do post category. And we'll do it like this, and then we'll do cat1. Okay, and I'm just kind of going off the cuff here. Some of this probably is going to need to be rewritten. Alright, so now we have a label, and then I'll copy this, and I'll put a line break. Just again, going off the top of my head, I usually have to recode things a couple times to get it how I want it. And we didn't start our paragraph tag here, so we'll do that. And then we'll put another one. We're just going to do cat2. Okay, and we want these to have the same name because we want them to get stored under the same. We don't want, in our database, we don't want post category 1, post category 2, post category 3. What we want is, we want post category and that to have multiple values. Now, again, I'm thinking here, I'm probably going to have to rewrite that just a little bit, but we'll get to that in a minute. And then, last but not least, we're going to do our submit button. Okay, so we'll do input type equals submit, and we'll do value equals submit, and be done. Okay, so that should give us something close to what we're looking for. Again, I'm just getting this laid out so we have something. So I'm going to put this here. Now, what generally you'll do with something like this is you'll put this in a new folder, and we'll call this admin, and inside our admin then we'll have post edit.php. Okay, so we would save it somewhere like that. So if we head over, we'll get a new thing here, and we'll go localhost /cman /admin /post edit.php. It should be right. Okay, so here's our form, and let's go ahead and let's actually put this into a form now since we haven't done that. And we'll, inside our body here, we'll just start our form tag. We're going to do we're going to leave the action blank because we're going to self-submit. So we'll do method equals post. Okay, and the action we're just going to leave blank. Put this all inside of a form. And again, when you're building your application, you're going to want to, of course, go through and style all this. But if we sat down and did every little thing, this would be an 8-hour video, and I don't think it's necessary for you to really get how to do a content management system. Okay, so this is going to be a self-submitting form. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here, and I'm just going to do a print R on our post data so we can see what gets submitted. This is kind of the fail-safe for a coder, because I'll be frank with you, when it comes to HTML forms, I don't always remember exactly what gets submitted and how. Like with the categories, again, off the top of my head, I don't necessarily remember exactly how it all gets submitted. But the thing is I don't have to. You don't have to memorize everything, because you can come in here and you can use this print or post. You can see exactly how it gets submitted. When you can read that kind of stuff, then you know how to adjust your code to make it work. I'm going to wrap this in pre-tags so it's a little bit easier to read. And so now we have our form here, and we can come over here and you can see it's giving us a blank array now because there's nothing in our post. So this is our title, so we'll say title, content, and we'll check both categories and see what happens here. All right, so you see for our post title, we got our title, content, post category. It was kind of my hunch that with the checkbox we checked both, but it's only going to get the last one. So what we'd want to do here in order to handle that is we're going to put this into an array. So what we're going to do is the name, we're going to change it, and we're going to use array notation. So we're going to use, we'll just say first. You're going to want to have a much better way of doing this, and use your creativity, but we'll do second here. Okay, that's array notation. So now, if we go back to post edit, and let's just redo it and see if it'll, here, let's go to title, content, check both. Now you can see our post category is an array, and it's got first and second in it. Okay, so now we're still storing both categories. If I come in here and I go title, content, and I just click 1, then what's going to happen is it's going to have our first here. Now, again, you can probably come up with a better way of actually doing that, but the big thing is to get it stored into an array so you can capture all of the categories that are getting clicked on, that are getting submitted. Again, when I say do it a better way, I mean just naming it, which for your application, there be ways that are better for you to do that or whatever, but you want to capture this into an array so you can get everything that's captured or that's submitted as a category. So now you can add categories. You can add categories, you could add 100 categories, and because you're passing it into an array, and when we go to insert this, you're going to have to deal with it as an array. It doesn't matter, because having to deal with an array, you already have to do it. It doesn't matter if it has 1 or 100, you deal with it the exact same way. So a lot of times when you're submitting data into a database, dealing with it as an array is a really good way. If you know that at some point you could have more of a particular thing like tags or categories, it's a really good idea to just have it saved as an array right off the cuff. That way it doesn't matter later on if you add 100, you're still dealing with it as an array. Now, post title and post content, you don't necessarily, you know that you're not going to have 2 post content areas or 2 post titles in the majority of cases. Now, if you were, you would maybe write a special content type and you would have special code for dealing with that. So you may have a scenario where you do that, but for the most part, even in WordPress, you don't add multiple content areas. You only can have 1 content area, and that is a super highly developed script. So you're not going to have multiple post title and post content areas for the most part. So you don't really necessarily need to worry about it there, but with categories and tags and so on and so forth, you would. And of course, if you're allowing the user or the author, whoever's writing the post, to add multiple categories and tags, then you're just going to have to do it right off the bat. So anyway, this is our form. Now that we have our post data and we know what we're getting, then we can start to look at our backend to submit this data. Also, we can use this then to create our database because we know what we need. We have our post title, our post content, and our post category. So we need a database and we need a table that have that information in it that we can store it someplace. So what I'm going to do is we'll head over here to, you can go to localhost/php myadmin like this. And this is going to take us to our PHP myadmin for managing our database. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a new database and I'm going to call it CMan, and we'll create it. You gotta click it again. Okay, so now our database has been created and we're going to create a new table, and in this table we're just going to call it posts because this is going to store our posts. Now again, as we talked about on the login section, you would have a user section where you would have your users table where you would store user data, and that would all be based around allowing them to log in and log out. So you could build that just like you would. Then when you come in to add in your content management system, you come in and you can create a post table. The number of fields, well, we're going to have 4. Now you may say, oh, well, post title, post content, post category, that's 3. But we actually need a 4th, and that 4th is for our ID. So we're going to hit go, and we're going to have our first field. And so that's going to be an ID, and it's going to be an integer, and we're going to make this primary, and we're going to make it auto increment. Okay, so that's essentially going to make it so it'll auto increment. So anytime a new record is added, this will auto increment. So that's what we need in order for when you add one post, the first post, it puts it as ID 1, then when you add another one, it puts it as 2, and you don't have to constantly specify the ID. It'll just automatically increment. This is also the primary key, so essentially that means it's going to be the key upon which, you know, everything else rests. So when you're doing queries and stuff, then you know that. Now for creating these tables, you can actually create an install script to do all of this for you as well. So that's available to you if you want to do that. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to put this default, leave that as none. The type, we're going to, it's an int, and we can specify the length of 20. And actually, now that I think about it, that will need to be a big int. So big int 20, and so that's the max length. Now you think about that, you're talking about an ID number here. So 20, if you're talking about 20 place values, you know, 20, you're gonna have 20 characters essentially. That's a lot of posts. So you know, I mean, 7 is a million, so we're talking, you know, trillions of posts. So chances are you're never going to hit this number. Okay, this keeps it from someone passing in something weird or whatever the case may be. So we have big int, we have 20, we have it as the primary, the default's none, and it's auto incrementing. Okay, so the next one that we want to do is we want to do post, and we want to do title. Now for the post title, what we're going to do is we're going to do text, and text is essentially, it's just like common text. It allows you to put in a number of different characters. It doesn't have, in terms of the characters and stuff, it doesn't have a limit. That's going to be something that you want because you never know what's going to get passed in the post title. Okay, same for the post content. Again, anything could get passed in this, so you want to put it as text. So you don't want it as, what I'm saying is you don't want it as an integer, which is only going to set numbers. You don't want it as, you know, a decimal or any of these other things. You could do things like blob and things like that, but it's not really necessary. What you really want is you want text. So you're going to keep it to text, but it can be pretty much any text. Okay, and so the post content, and actually now that I think about it, you're not going to want text, you're going to want long text because this could get really long. Okay, so you have long text for the post content, we'll leave that, and then the post category, and we'll do the same thing. We'll leave this as we'll put this as text, like the title, because the categories won't be near as long as what the content might be. Okay, so that gives us what we need for our fields here. We'll hit go. Oh shoot. And that actually got me to add a field. I always do that. Hit save, and now we have our 4 fields. Okay, so this gives us our 4 fields. We have our ID, our post title, post content, and our post category. Again, working with MySQL, honestly, this back-end part, you really just need from my perspective, you really just need a basic working knowledge. A lot of the stuff that you see in terms of all of the other stuff that you could do, a lot of times you're not going to use, especially when you're building an application that kind of already has some precedence. So if you're building a content management system and you decide to use your own content management system or build your own, you're going to have some precedents out there with WordPress and Joomla and Drupal and things like that. You can use those as examples for what you're doing. The other thing with that is I'm aware that most people probably aren't going to write their own content management system. So this isn't necessarily so much about writing your own, but about understanding the ones that are already out there and how to work with them. Because I guess me personally, unless there's some really special reason, I don't see the value beyond learning. You definitely write one to learn, but beyond learning, I don't see a ton of value in writing your own CMS when you have really good programs out there that are available, like WordPress and Joomla and Drupal and so on and so forth. So again, I understand that this isn't necessarily about you writing your own, but it's about learning how to use the ones that work out there, so or that are already out there. But anyway, we have our database or our table created here. So now we can start to work with the interaction and actually insert the data that we have into our database. Once we're inserting it, then we can start working with how to retrieve. All right, so let's go ahead and head on over to our database class, and let's talk about a little bit about what we're going to do here. Now, I know with these tutorials we've gone over creating a database class quite a bit, but it is important, and so I want to make sure that we're covering it. So there's a couple different ways that we can do this. You can use a construct method to connect to the database as soon as you call the class, so as soon as you instantiate the class, which can be a good idea. And then from that we can use different methods, so in order to access in order to run different functions on the database. So you'd probably want to do actually we're gonna do if the class doesn't exist, and we're just gonna do DB. Again, with your applications, when you're self-contained inside your application, if you're writing a custom application, then you don't have to necessarily worry so much about naming convention, because and actually let's do this DB, because the namespace is only going to be within your application. So if you're trying to integrate with other applications, it might become an issue. So you may want to just name it up front to look for that, or to set it up for that. But in this case we're not, because we're just doing an example here. So we're going to create a new class called DB, and then in that we're going to have our construct method. So actually it has to be public, I believe. Public function construct, and construct it's your constructor. So essentially whenever the class gets called, it's going to run this function automatically. Now with the database class, it's good, you can use that as a way to connect to your database as soon as the class is called. Okay, so you can use a construct method to connect, and then you can use a destruct method to disconnect. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll just do a MySQLi equals, and we're going to call our MySQLi class inside PHP, and this is going to allow us to connect to the database, pass in our information, and so on and so forth. So for this class, what you need is you need your host, you need your user, you need your password, and you need your database. So we're going to put in our database here. Now, you know that we can create a config file and we can have that data entered and we can have it submitted here. Now, when you create a database class like this and you're doing it this way, chances are that you're only ever going to be entering this information once right here in the construct method, because from here on out we're just going to use the construct method and what we return here in order to connect to the database. So you're not going to have to re-enter it. So when you think about a config file, in most cases a config file is useful if you have to re-enter your connection data in multiple places. With this setup, that's not necessarily the case. However, if you're creating an application that's going to be public facing, like for example WordPress, then it's oftentimes good to still create a config file, because you can allow your user to go in and edit that information and it not have any of this code, so it's a lot less confusing, and allow them to enter that information there and then just pull it and use it here. Okay, so it still has value in doing it that way. That said, if it's an internal application that you're going to be using and nobody's ever outside is going to be using it, you don't necessarily need a config file, because you can set all those configuration options here. So again, it's really up to you, but I wanted to show you that. So what we're going to do is we're going to do localhost, and our user here is root, and our password we haven't set one, so we're going to leave it blank, and our database then is our CMS database. Okay, so that's going to be our information off the top of my head here. Again, I believe I don't have the password. So anyway, we'll be able to check to see if we're actually able to connect. So how we're going to do that is we're going to come down right below this, and we're going to put if, and we're going to use our MySQL class. This is what makes using this class handy, because it has a lot of these functions already in here for you. So MySQLi, and the method we're going to call is connect, and then it's error no. Okay, this is essentially going to see if we are able to successfully connect. And so if we're not able to successfully connect, then we're going to do a printf, and we're going to echo out what our error is. So we're going to do connect failed, and we can do some of this here, and we're going to do essentially what we want is we want the error. So this is going to give us our error. That really, the previous is really just syntax for how the error is laid out, but we're going to do our connect error here, and we can close that, and then we can exit. So it's just going to stop. If we can't connect, we can't really do anything. Okay, so what we're going to do then from here is if that's if it fails. So if it doesn't fail, then what we're going to return is we're going to return our MySQLi connection, essentially. Okay, so the connection that we created up here. So what we want to do here then is we want to go and we want to include this into our post edit. Okay, so up here then I'm going to actually create a new PHP, because that other is really just for testing. So we're going to create a new section here, and we're going to require once, and it's going to be, let's see, we're in admin, so we're going to go up a level, and we're going to go to our includes, and we're going to go to our class DB. Okay, now this isn't where you're going to do this, okay, but this is where we can test it. Okay, so we're just requiring it here. Okay, so that should give us a look at what's going on with our database. And let's see, before we head over there, let's go ahead and we're going to add in this. This is for our error reporting so we can see our errors. So let's go ahead and head over, and this will give us an idea of what's going on. So we head over here. Let's go ahead and just go back to this, and let's see. Okay, so I forgot to add .php at the end here, which usually you need to add. So let's add that, and then we'll come back over to our post edit here. Okay, so now this may not seem like much, but what this tells us is that, okay, we're not getting an error. Well, we're not necessarily instantiating the class, but right now we've got everything connected and we're not getting any errors, okay? So we've got this all connected. Now what we can do after require once is we can instantiate our class. So we can say db equals new db, like this, okay? Because from our database class, the name of our database is class database, okay? So we're just instantiating our class here. Now, this should tell us if we're going to get some sort of error when we actually, with how we connect it, if we're having trouble connecting. Okay, so let's go ahead and come back to our page here. So again, remember in the class, what we're doing in the construct method is we're connecting, and if we can't connect, what we're doing is we're returning an error message and we're exiting. So since we're not getting an error message and we're actually able to go through, that tells us that we should be connected to our database now. So we should be all connected to our database and now have our MySQL connection now over in our post edit here is assigned to basically this new DB here. So now we can run different functions or different methods from inside that class, and we can be able to, we'll be able to connect to and do things with our database. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to actually come in here and we're going to create some methods for our class here. So next one we'll do is we'll just make these all public for now. You can decide for your application what makes sense, but yep, we'll make this a public function, and we're going to call it insert, and this is going to allow us to insert data into our database. Again, we've covered this quite a bit in some other tutorials, so if you want to skip this part, feel free. Really all we're doing is building the database class, but again, it might be helpful for later on in the tutorial we actually start using some of this stuff. So we're going to do this insert method, and we're going to do, to start, we're just going to do a hand-coded or hard-coded query. So when I do the queries for the database, I like to do them like this, so they're easier to read. So we're going to do an, let's see, we're going to do an insert into, and we're going to insert into our post table. So insert into posts. And we want to specify our columns, so we're going to say our columns are post title, post content, and post category. So those are our columns, and then we're going to do our values, and we're just going to hard code some for now. So we'll just do title, content, and category. Okay, so that's going to give us our query. Now what we're going to do is we're going to actually run the query. So we're going to do result equals, and we're going to do MySQLi, and we're going to do query, and we're going to pass in our query that we just created to run. Okay, and then I'm going to fix the colon here, and then we're going to return our result. Okay, so this will give us a basic look at how our class is working. This is how I code. You'll notice my code is very trial and error. Again, I've done this a number of times, but I work with WordPress a lot, so a lot of this stuff I don't even have to do. But again, it's really just trial and error, just going through, making sure everything works and going from there. So we'll save that. And then what we want to do is we want to go over and we want to actually just run this and just make sure everything's working right off the top. And then we can kind of start to flesh this out a little bit. So we'll come over to our post edit, and right below our database here, we're going to do a print R, and we're going to call our new method. So we're going to do db, and we're going to do insert, and we're just going to print R that. And that's going to show us if it actually is going to insert the data or not. And we do that to help us validate everything we've written essentially in our class up to this point, to make sure we are still connecting correctly, to make sure our insert is working here. And if it all works, then we can kind of start to flush it out. So my guess is there's probably something wrong, because there's always something wrong when I do this. But we'll head over here to our post edit page and see what we get. All right, so something's wrong. And we have an undefined variable MySQLi in our db class.php, class db PHP file, and we have a call to a member function query. Okay, so these are actually interrelated. So we have an undefined variable MySQLi, which is actually our MySQLi that we're trying to pass from our construct, and then on that variable we're calling the query method. So since this variable is undefined, this query is not going to work. So once we fix one, we'll have fixed both. So let's see what's going on here. So we're calling MySQLi. Okay, so we actually don't. It's right, we don't have MySQLi. Okay, that's why. Okay, so we don't want to return MySQLi up here from our construct. What we actually want to do, let's try this. We'll do this, and we'll call this, what we want to do is we want to set it as a property. So we'll we'll just call it connection. Again, you could probably come up with something else. Equals MySQLi. So now we've set that as a property, and down here we can, let's do it this way. MySQLi equals, and we'll do this dash connection. Okay, and Q here. Alright, so now hopefully that will get us something here. So what we're doing here is, instead of returning MySQLi, because we return MySQLi, but it's not actually returning anywhere within our class, we need to use it. So what we want to do is set it as a property. So now down here we can call it, we could actually come in here and just type in this connection right here, like this. Oop. We could do that, but that starts to look a little weird. So we'll just do MySQLi like that, and we'll set the variable up here and see what that does for us. So we'll go ahead and save that, and then we'll head back over to our page here and we'll go to it. We're not getting any error, so let's go ahead but we're also not getting anything returned. So let's go ahead and look at our database here, and we'll just kind of refresh this, and yeah. So we haven't got anything. I would be able to hit browse if something had been inserted. So nothing's been inserted, so we do have something going on here. So we'll take a look and see what that is. So if we head back over to our thing here, we can take a look at our syntax here. Almost always syntax. And if I were to guess, I would say that this is probably why, because you need to have this in quotations like this, single quotations. So let's go ahead and add that. Again, it's always something simple when it comes to errors. You just kind of got to work through it. Alright, so let's go ahead and run back over here and see if this works here. Alright, we are getting a 1 here. So let's go back over to our posts, and yes, so now we have our title, content, category. So that was our error. It was just I hadn't put single quotes around the values here. So again, something simple. This whole thing here with this connection, again, if you want, you can do it like this so that you don't have to do the extra step of setting that variable. This should work just the same as doing it the way I had it. We'll test it just to see, but that should work just the same. So we'll head back over. We'll go to our page here, see what we get, and then we'll go to our database and posts, and yeah, you can see it inserts it in there. So you could do it just like this as well, however you want to do it. In fact, let's just go ahead and do it that way throughout this so that we can see that that works like that. Okay, so this gives us our insert function. Now, of course, we're just hard coding this. Okay, so what we need to do now is we need to create a connection from our form to what we've got here. So the reason I do it this way is because I know ultimately how I'm going to set this all up. And so I'm essentially going to, I've already made my query that I need for my insert class. Okay, so what I mean by that is we're not actually going to hard code this in here or put the query in here at all. We're going to take this out, and instead what we're going to do is we're going to use a variable, and we're going to call it query like this. So what that's going to give us is essentially we've got our database part already written. So now what we can do is we can come over to our insert class here, and we can just create this as a we can use this essentially to create the connection between the form and the database class, because we have our database class set up to accept a query for inserting data, and it'll do all of the MySQL stuff. Now in our insert class is where we want to actually write our query, and this just helps us. The more you make this modular like this, the easier it is to come back and update this stuff. So when we want to do an insert for a post, then we have a new we're going to have a class, and again, if the class does not exist, we're going to create one, and we'll call this one we'll just call it insert like this. Again, your names can be a lot better than mine. This is really just for demo purposes, and I would sit down and actually think all this out and map this out if I were building a real application here. Then if it doesn't exist, we're going to create it, and we're going to have we're not going to do a constructor method here. Instead, what we're going to do, we'll get to that in a second, but we'll create a public function, and we'll call it insert post, something like that, and we'll start like this. And we're going to, essentially what I'm getting to is we're going to paste in our query here. Okay, so now this, what we need to do is we need to include our database class in here. So into our insert class, so we're going to require once, and it's going to be our class db.php. Okay, so we're going to acquire our database class, and then we can do two things when we do this. We can either instantiate the class at the end of this, so then it becomes a global variable whenever we include it somewhere, or we can just include it wherever we insert it. I prefer to do this, so we're going to do db equals new db like this. Okay, so then what that does is instantiates the class. So like over here, we actually wouldn't need this anymore here, right? The reason that's handy is because anywhere I include this, now I already have this this variable set up. So all I need to do in my insert here now inside this function is go global, and I'll go db. So now I have access to all the methods inside of that class. So now what I can do is I have my query here, and I can come down here and I can run the function. So I can do, we'll just do it all together. We'll do return, and we'll do db, and we'll do insert, and we'll pass in query, the query that we just wrote, like this. Okay, so this hard-coded query is now going to be passed into our database insert method, and it's going to give us, essentially it's going to do the exact same thing, but I've split it up now. So now I can run a number of different queries on this. So in my insert class, I can insert a post. If I have categories, I can write one to insert a category, and so on and so forth. And I can use the same insert function and just pass the custom query to it. Okay, so that's why we do this. And again, I know I've covered this quite a bit, but this stuff a lot of times for people can be a little bit confusing. So I want to make sure I go over it again here. So we can insert that. Okay, so we've got our class insert. So essentially now what I can do, again with this, I'm going to instantiate it. So I'm going to go insert equals new insert, like this. And I'm going to now include, instead of in the post edit including requiring the class DB, I'm going to include class insert, like this. And now I don't need to instantiate this. I have an instantiated version of insert right here, so now I can call insert post, like this. So if we do insert like this, and we do insert, and we do post. Actually, let's make that a little bit simpler. Let's come back over to our insert class. Instead of insert post, because it's in the class, we can just do post. So now, makes it a little bit more readable. So now we have insert post. Okay, so we're calling our insert class and the post method, and we're running this query here. Okay, so essentially what this is going to do is, if everything's set up right, it should do the exact same thing we did before, except now it should insert this data, except now we have it all kind of parsed out into the different classes. Alright, so we're getting our return here of 1, which tells me it should have worked, and 7, we're getting the exact same thing. Okay, so now we have this kind of all parsed out. Now of course we're not going to we're not going to be hard coding data like this. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to figure out now, okay, what do I need to do from the post edit page in order to pass the data I need into my query here. Okay, so we know from our post data, we know what data we're getting, right? So if we come here and we do title, content, we click the two cats, we know we have this data here in this array. So what we want to do is we want to essentially take this and pass it into our function and allow our function to work with that data and insert it instead of our hard-coded data. Okay, so what we're going to do, we could do this a number of ways, but for this particular setup, let's just go ahead and, why don't we pass in the whole post array here, like this. Okay, now there's a number of ways you could do this, because you may want to check data, you may want to do this or that or the other. There may be reasons why you don't want to insert the whole post, but let's just go ahead and insert the whole post into our insert function. Okay, now over here it's not taking any variable, but we're going to change that. We'll change this to post data, like this, or let's just do post data, like that. Okay, so now we know what we're passing in is we're passing in this array. So now we can work with this array to insert it into our database here. So we have our database, we have our global database. Now what we can do is we can essentially use specific values here to get this all in here. Okay, so we still want to insert into post title, post content, and post category, but we want to insert our custom data. So we head back over to our insert class, and essentially what we're going to do is we're going to take this post data and we're just going to pass it in here. So we're just going to go post data actually variable, post data, and we're going to do post title like this. So that's going to grab our title from our post data and insert it there. And then essentially we'll do that same thing for all of these save one of them. So we need to serialize our array, but we'll talk about that here in just a second. So we're going to paste this in. We need to make sure we still have the quotations here, and we're going to change this to post content. Okay, that's going to again grab the data from our form. Make sure our syntax is all right here. Now for our category, what we need to do is we need to serialize it because it's in an array. So before we can insert it into the database, we need to actually serialize it. So if we let's just go ahead and click this. We need to serialize this post category array. So what we can do is we can up here we can put just make a variable that says category equals, and then we'll do serialize, and we'll serialize our post data, and we're going to do our post category. Okay, so that's going to serialize that, and now we can just change this to the variable category that we have serialized, and that should work for us. So let's come back over here to our edit page, and what we'll do is, actually let's add one more thing so we can make this right. So we got this all set up. Let's go to our post edit. Now what we want to do is we want to set this to let's go ahead and, I'm just seeing where to wrap it here. Let's go ahead and do it like this. So if not empty post, so if our post data is not, our post array is not empty, then we're going to do all this stuff. Otherwise we don't need to because it's empty and it doesn't matter. Okay, so and let's actually bring this print our post down here as well. That way it's all together. Alright, so if there's post data, it's going to print our post data before it's inserted, and then it's going to print the return of our insert, which should just be a 1 for true. Okay, so if we go to this page now, now we have a regular form here. Now we can go the title, the content, and click our two categories and submit. Alright, we have this syntax error, so let's go ahead and go over to line 9. Probably something simple here. It was on insert, I believe, though. Yep, on insert.php. So line 9. I didn't close parentheses. Okay, so close our parentheses there. Always something simple. And we come back here. Let's just refresh. See if that'll do the trick. Okay, so now I have our post title, the title, post content, the content, post categories, cat1, cat2. So we should get something similar in our database here. So we go to our posts. You can see we have the title, we have the content, and we have our serialized array for our categories, which is exactly what we want. So now what we have, having walked through all of that, what we have is we have a form that we can add posts now to our database. Okay, so you could come in here and get rid of this print our post here, and you could probably, instead of doing a print r on this, you could put something like, you know, it's going to be a 1, which is for true if it works. So we can do if, and we can just wrap this. So basically, if anything, if it's true, then we're going to echo a message that says echo p data inserted successfully. this. Okay, so now we can come back over to our, and we can do title 2, content 2, we can click one category, submit. Now it says data inserted successfully. And if we come over to our posts, you can see that it was inserted successfully as well. Okay, so that's how we get our table up and working. So now we have data that we can insert into our database. Now what we can do is we can use our query class to pull that data and be able to get it out of our database. And we're going to walk through again kind of the whole thing with that and show you how we do that. So let's come over here to our classes again. And now what we're going to create in our database class is we're going to create a function for selecting data. So call this public function, and we'll call it select. And again, we're going to start off and we're just going to do a hard-coded query and go from there. So again, we can write our query and we can do it. This is almost identical. Save the syntax, the actual MySQL syntax. So here we can do select all from posts. Okay, now let's do that. And we can do result equals, we can do our this connection query, and we can do our query that we're passing. Right, and we can return results. Okay, so we can do that. And let's go to our index.php, because our index.php is actually where we would use this select all from. So let's go ahead to our index.php, and actually to have this go, to smooth this out a little bit, let's go ahead and go to our class query. Let's just call our select function for right now. So let's go ahead and create this so that we have it, and we'll do if class does not exist query, then we will create it. Alright. And in this, we're going to have a public function called let's do all posts. And we'll pass anything to it. And all we're going to do for right now is we're just going to return, actually we're going to do global database, and then we're going to return database, and I believe it was select function that we just created. So all we're doing is returning that function. We're not doing anything special. I of course need to include the database class. So we'll do class db.php. Okay, so all we're really doing is we're just returning that function. So now we can create a global variable like this. Okay, so if we go to our index.php now, page now is where we want to go. We want to call our query and our all posts. So we want to query all posts. We're going to do this under home. So under here we're going to do print r, actually we're going to do, we're going to do print r, and we're going to do query all posts. Okay, so we want to just query all the posts. run our home, of course we need to require our class query.php right here. Alright, so this should give us a printout of all the posts that we have in our database. And if we look at our database, we have 2 in here right now. So we should get these 2. And so if we go to our index.php page here and go to what would be the home page, then we have an error. Okay, so let's go and see what our error is. So let's go to post edit, let's grab this and paste that in so we can see what the error is. Alright, let's go back here. Okay, so we're not finding our class query.php. I wonder if because I'm in the home page. It includes like this. Okay. Always something simple. 13. I think I know what I did. Okay. Yes, because I'm treating it as a property. It's a method, so I need to add my parentheses. Always something simple. Always something simple. Okay. Looks like we have something funky here, so let's go over to our database class, line 28. Oh. Bunch of syntax errors, but that's the nice thing with PHP is it'll tell you, so you'll know. Alright, let's try this now. Hopefully we're getting close here. On line 28, our class. Okay. So essentially it's not getting anything. So it's not finding anything in that table. And we just want to look over our syntax. So I had put result, and it's results. And it's always syntax errors. And there we go. Now we actually get something. So what we're getting here is we're actually getting the result object. Okay, so we have to actually do something with this because again, I didn't do anything after. I didn't do anything with it after I got it. So we're just going to get the MySQL result essentially. So we actually need to then put this into results, and so we'll need some other functions for that for when we query. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is let's actually turn this back to result, and we're going to come down here, and you probably remember this, we need to do a while loop. So again, we can come in here and we can loop through these results. So we're going to do a while loop, and we're going to do, let's see, we're going to do while, and then we're going to do, essentially what we're grabbing is the object. So while the object equals, and it's our result, what we're doing is we're going to fetch the object. So as long as there's an object to fetch, essentially, we're going to run our loop. Okay, that's essentially what this is doing. And we're putting it into this object variable so that we can then come down here and we're going to say our results equal our object, and we're doing it, I need to add these to capture each iteration of that object. So essentially what we're doing is while there is results in the objects, we're going to loop through each result in this MySQL object. Again, if we come back over here, you see it, right here it says MySQL result object, and then it has field count of 4, number of rows 2. Okay, so what that's telling us is there's 4 fields and there's 2 results. If we look at our database, we have 4 fields and we have 2 results. Okay, so it's just telling us what we have in our database. So, and it's stored again as an object. Okay, so what we're doing in our code is we're essentially saying we're going to loop through this object and we're going to get each record or each line of results, and we're going to store them into this results array. That's essentially what this is doing. Okay, and we're doing this object equals so that we can then, for each iteration, we can use that to grab that result. Okay, the end point of all this is we should end up with an array that that gives us all of our results that we can actually work with in PHP. So let's come here and see what we get. And that's what we get. So now we have an array, and it's an array of object, and each object is the record from the database. So we have our first record of ID of 14, post title. We have our second record here, ID of 13, post title, so on and so forth. Okay, so this gives us a list then of everything that's in our inside of our database. Now this is what we can use to loop through this array, and we can specify, we can actually style this out to make it look like something. Okay, we're not going to do that just yet because we want to, again, I want to keep focused on the big picture stuff. My guess is at this point, getting to this point where you have this array of objects that you can work with. And let me just come here so it's a little bit maybe easier to read. Okay, so again, make it a little bit easier to read so you can actually see this laid out. But we have an array of objects, and we have all the information about each one. Now for our post category, we need to unserialize it before we use it, but that again is pretty straightforward. So this is the home page. Now what we want to do is we want to first take this and make it, we want to kind of parse it out. So we're going to come to our database class, and just like before, we're going to get rid of this. And instead what we're going to do is we're going to allow this to accept that as an argument in the function. So we're going to go query, and then we're going to go to our query class, and under all posts, that's where we're going to do the all posts. So now we'll put this here, and we're going to say this equals, actually I think yeah. So now we're actually putting it in here. So what this allows us to do is we can select all posts, and now we can write another function that will allow us to select only certain posts. So we'll do this public function, and we'll do post, and what we need is the post ID. Okay, so now we can write a similar query, except we're going to select all from posts, but we're going to add a where statement. Okay, so we're going to add where, and we're going to do ID equals, and we'll do post ID. So where the ID of a particular result in our database equals the post ID that we're going to pass to it, which we're going to get from our query parameters, and that's how we're going to do a single page. So then we'll return db select like this. We need to globalize our database. Like this. Okay, so now we can return one post based off of post ID, hopefully. And actually need to pass in our query here, since we're now for both of these. since we're now creating it here, we need to pass it in. You'll notice that we're still using the same database method. We're using the select method from the database. Okay, that's what this allows you to do. I'm creating two different queries, but I'm using the same database method to do it. So that makes it easier for me. Instead of each time I want to write a different custom query, whether I'm pulling all posts or single posts or categories or whatever, instead of having to rewrite all of this code, when I do that, I can just pass the query in as a variable and rewrite that all over here. So now it allows me to keep everything kind of separated. And when I need to add more queries, it's really simple. You see how quickly I added that new query. Okay, so now we can come back over and we should still get the same thing here. Okay, 21 in database class on line 21. I'm using parentheses, which parentheses, okay, I need brackets instead. Alright, let's go back over. Again, this is how I code. So I just kind of muddle through it. Alright, so now what we want to do is we want to come over to our index.php, and instead of calling the all post, we want to call post, and we want to call the pass post ID. So here under single, what we're going to do is I'll just essentially copy this. Now when we know that our post ID, we have a post ID being passed, we can query for post, our post method, and we can pass in our post ID, which we have saved in the variable post. Okay, so this should give us the information about a single post. So if we come here, alright, now if we pass in a query parameter and we say p equals 13, we know we have one like that. We can okay, undefined cat, but you see down here, that's just a notice. You see down here, we're getting our information for post 13, and that's how you create a single page. Okay, now just to cover the warning here, the notice here, it's saying you have an undefined index cat on line 9. The reason that it says that, if we come over here, is because you see we have our if get is not empty, we're checking for post and we're checking for cat. In this case, because we passed the post but we didn't pass the cat, cat is going to be empty, so it's going to send a notice. Now, this is just a notice, so it's not a huge deal. You can, if we turned off the error reporting, it's actually going to go away. And you'll notice systems like WordPress, they actually suppress PHP notices and warnings by default. So a lot of times when you're running a WordPress site, let's say, you'll actually have notices and warnings that are happening, but you won't see them because they're suppressed, and that's kind of a standard thing. It's only when you turn debugging on in WordPress that you'll actually see those. So it's not a huge deal to fix this. What you could do is you could run another if statement. So we could say, if we want to get rid of everything, we could say, okay, get's not empty, so now let's see if get p is empty. So if not empty, and we'll do get, and we'll do p like this. Now we know that that's not empty, so we can set it as a variable, okay, like this. And then we do the same thing for cat. And we'll just overwrite this and change it back. All right, so if cat isn't empty, we're going to set cat to the value like this. Okay, so now we're running an if-else statement. That's actually going to help us. If we come here, then messed up our deal here, but let's see. I'm sure it's probably some kind of syntax error. Oh, okay. So empty, you got to wrap this in parentheses as well. Of course, you know that. You probably saw it when I was writing it. So if post isn't empty and the cat isn't empty, then we know that we have those values and we can kind of go through this. All right, so let's go back here. All right, so now you notice that that notice is gone, and that's because we did a check first, and we're not setting that variable if it doesn't exist, the cat variable. So it doesn't exist, so we just don't set it. If it did exist, we would set it. So that gets rid of the warning that you have here. So that's how you can do that. So now if you look at this kind of big picture, you can see what's happening here. You can see that we're using what's passed in the query parameter to run queries based off of it. So we're on a single page here, and we get only the information for that particular post. If we go back to the home page, we get it for all posts here. Okay, so what we can do then is we can use linking essentially to make this all work. So what we would do, and this is where you kind of can get into themes and stuff with WordPress. This is what themes actually do. But what we can do here is, instead of doing a print R, what we can do is we can do, make this kind of simple. We can do posts array equals, and all right, so our variable post array equals our all posts, and in here we can actually do the same thing. This is why theming is nice, because you can actually only have to do this once. Where you'll see we're going to be repeating code, but themes kind of eliminate that. That said, it's a whole, there's a ton that would go into theming something like this out. Okay, so we have our post array. It's either going to equal all posts or it's going to equal our individual posts. Okay, so you notice here that we have both sets stored in this post array here. So what we can do is we can actually, and this is the way a lot of this is kind of how WordPress works, but we can actually come down and use that to create a list, and it'll change based off of if we're on the home page or if we're on a single page. So let's just go ahead and look at it. So again, we're going to want to create our HTML. We can go our head, and we'll go title. We're going to leave that B for right now. Actually, we'll come back to that and I'll show you why in a minute. And then we can go our body and our HTML. Okay, something like this. Alright, so what we can do inside here then is we can kind of use some if-else statements so to create our layout here. So again, whether it's the home page, the thing to keep in mind is whether it's the home page or whether it's a single page, you're still going to have a title. You're going to still have some content section. It may be an excerpt versus the whole content. You're going to have a link. You may have a list of categories and so on and so forth. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do for each, and we're going to do post array as post. You'll see in a minute this is going to work, I hope. But again, this is where themes come in handy, because you can actually write all this code inside of a theme. But alright, so what we're doing is we're looping through our results. Now remember, here we have two results. If we go to a single page like this, we have one result, but it doesn't really matter because the structure of it is the same. So we can kind of use that to our advantage when we're coding here. So what I mean by that is we can just go, let's go H1, and we'll go, and we'll echo out the post, and we're going to do the post title. Okay. Alright, that's in our H1 tag. Now we can come down to a paragraph tag and we can echo out our post and our post content. If you ever looked at a WordPress theme, you'll see something very similar to this, except they have their own built-in functions that make it a little bit easier. And you could certainly write those yourself for your own application. Okay. And we're going to wrap this inside of a div called post. So we'll see how this works here in just a second. Alright, so let's save that. Alright, so now we have this, and let's go back to, so I want to make sure. Okay, let's go back to our home page here and see what we get. Oh, because they're objects, not arrays. Alright, so these are objects like this. Instead of using array notation, we use object notation. Okay. Alright, so you see on the home page it's title 1 content, or title 2 content 2, the title, the content. You see, if you look at WordPress posts, you'll see structurally this is about how they're done. Now what they normally do is then when you have this as a link. So what we do, and this is where it gets this is kind of where it all comes together, is we create a link here. Now we know what we need for the link. We need our domain name. So you could actually have a config file that helps you to get the domain name of a certain site, so you can make it absolute. I'm just going to use relative here. So I'm going to say that our link is, we know we need to pass as a query parameter. Well, we have the post ID of each post. So for each post, we're going to create a link where P equals, and then we're going to use PHP to echo the post ID. And that's going to give us our link, like this. And if that doesn't make sense yet, it'll make sense here in a second. So if we refresh this, now this is a link, and if you'll notice down in the very bottom left here, it says our localhost, our cman, index.php with our query parameter p equals 14. If we hover over this one, it equals 13. And if we click on title 2, it's going to take us to this. Now let's look at, so it's not giving us our post array. Let's see, because this is set as post. So change that, just a syntax error. So we'll refresh. Now we have title 2 and content 2. We have it just for this one post. If we come back here and we click on the title, now we have it just for this one post because of the query parameter. That is ultimately, that is the big thing when it comes to that's ultimately what all this is designed to get to, essentially, with a CMS, is using the query parameters and using them dynamically like we've done, to now where you could create 100 different posts in your content management system and they would all show up like this automatically. So if I come over here and I go, let's say title 3, this is some content, and I click some of these and I hit submit, and we come back to our home page here, now I have title 3 automatically there, and if I click through to it, it's automatically there. I didn't have to do any more coding. That is the power of a CMS. That's where you want to get to. And now you can see that you can do that because I can pull the post title and the post content. I can pull anything about that particular post. Okay, so the categories, I can unserialize and do the categories. I can have any number of pieces of information here about this particular post, and I can grab it and display it automatically. So to really hopefully make that hit home, what we'll do is we'll go over to the actual WordPress database and show you what that looks like. So you see all these different tables, but you'll notice one of them here is WP Post. So if we look at it, you'll see that we have an ID, you can have a post author, the date, the content, the title, an excerpt, status, the slug or post, what's called the post name, the date. You can have all of this information here. So you see all of this information that you can store about a particular post that you can pull automatically, that you can pull and display dynamically using the system that I just showed you. Now, you notice we're in WP Posts, but we also have Post Meta. So this is additional data essentially that you can add. So you'll see it has a meta ID, but you have a post ID. So for post ID 1, you have this meta key called edit lock and this value. You can add any number of custom meta. So if you've worked with WordPress, essentially what this is the custom fields. You can add custom fields, use custom fields in WordPress, and this is how it's done, creating a relationships table like this. So that's where the power behind a CMS is, being able to get to this point that we're at now, which is being able to display data dynamically, and I can add it just as, again, as simply as I did by coming in here and filling out the form, and having it show up here, being able to click through, and so on and so forth. So conceptually, that's where I want you to get with a CMS, is understanding that part of it. From there, then you can start to look in some more of the advanced stuff that you may want to do, and actually building out a full CMS with having custom categories. With the categories the way we did it now, it actually doesn't work as well as the way, say, WordPress does it, where you have a categories actual table. So for example, if we come here, it's actually going to be under terms, term taxonomy. You have terms, term relationships, term taxonomy. Those are all basically to be able to create like categories and tags. It's the way WordPress does it, it's all in one. But this for you could be it could be categories, category relationships, and that's how you would know what post is related to or inside what categories through the relationships. That's actually a better way of doing it. The way we did it is just simple for demo reasons. But again, this is really where you want to get to in terms of a CMS and being able to do it this way. So hopefully conceptually that gives you the overall look at how you would actually go about creating a CMS. Again, if you actually want to create your own CMS, then what I would do is I would study a CMS like WordPress or Joomla or Drupal or whatever and look at how they're coded. And that's what open source is about, is to look at that and learn from it and then write your own. I'm not saying don't copy their code, but look at it and try to understand the conceptual part of what's going on behind it. And this is the conceptualization of what's going on behind a CMS. So when we get into a social network, you'll see that a social network is actually really similar. It's built almost identically, except instead of being centered around content and you adding content through something like this, it's centered around users and users registering on your site. So your form here for a social network is actually a registration form, and then other forms you build inside that they can add more information about themselves. But it's essentially the same thing. So anyway, we'll get into that in a minute. But that's how to build a CMS as quickly as I could do it for you. So hopefully you enjoyed that, and I'll talk to you later.